Well, Jeffrey and Cecilia, on a lighter note, we didn't have to do all of this permutations and calculations with the Super Falcons. We didn't have this much heart palpitations when the Super Falcons were playing. We wish the Super Eagles the very best, and we're supporting them. We just hope that things get better down the line, because they have a lot to maybe learn from the Super Falcons. And don't tell me that there's more physicality in the game, okay? Maybe there is, but the point is, the ladies are making us proud, and we also expect the same from the men. And that just naturally takes us to the next conversation about having a more inclusive society, because it's to our benefit. And we have joining us on the program this morning, Dr. Osasoyi Dirisu, who's Executive Director of a Policy Innovation Center. Dr. Dirisu, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Coyote, for having me.
It's good to have you. You're doing some work about new voices, new approaches to having an inclusive society, which naturally means that we'll have a more developed society, a more prosperous nation, and the rest. But I want to begin by asking you, for the benefit of a lot of Nigerians who hear Policy Innovation Center, I wonder, oh, I like what it sounds like, but what is the Policy Innovation Center? What's the simple answer to that?
Thank you so much. So the Policy Innovation Center, we're the first nationalized behavioral initiative in Africa. And the reason why the center was set up in 2021 was to have a center dedicated to using behavioral science and gender transformative approaches to inform better policy and program design. So in a nutshell, we have two phrases that summarize us: innovating for social disparities, to bridge social disparities. So any social disparity you can think of in critical sectors, that's what we innovate for. But then also innovating to develop policy for humans. So policies that would actually, using policy approaches that help to develop better policies that would work for human beings in real life settings.
Amazing. And this is some of the things we sort of take for granted. We just assume things happen.
Yeah.
We just do things and they happen, but we forget that there should be proper thinking. There's a process to coming up with policies. Did you just think, well, I think this is right, let's make it a policy? There's
Absolutely.
a process. It's a method to the madness. But in this case, there's a method to the sanity. So you just held the Gender and Inclusion Summit 2025, and this is like one of the biggest gatherings in this part of the world on gender and inclusion. I want to tie it to our reality as a society and as a nation. Why is this important? Gender and inclusion issues. Why is it important?
Thank you so much. So at the core of our work at the Policy Innovation Center, innovating to bridge social disparities, why are we passionate about that? We're passionate about that because we know that a lot of development frameworks sometimes leave out the concept of inclusivity. I don't think it's intentional. I mean, a lot of conversations around investments, aid, development, infrastructure, at the core of those conversations are how do we get return on investments? And so sometimes when business conversations go on about countries, GDP growth and all that, there's some tendency, if it was not intentionally included, to leave out that concept of inclusion. And why is inclusion important? Inclusion is important because if we're not striving for inclusive development, we'll be leaving an entire segment of society behind. And development that is not truly inclusive is also not sustainable. That is why we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. And within the Sustainable Development Goals, you will see that conversations around gender equity, inclusion of marginal groups, marginalized groups, really is important. So the reason why we do the Gender Summit, the reason why we started the Gender Summit in 2022 was because we knew that if there was no dedicated platform to bringing these conversations together annually, we may actually be leaving that large elephant out of the room.
Fantastic. So you have done this since 2022, you say, and you've time and again brought in leaders, political leaders, government representatives, business representatives, everyday Nigerians, to sit at a table of sorts to speak to these issues and come up with what I call it action plans on what to do to make sure we have a more inclusive society. What has been the success rate? What kind of feedback have you been getting? Such that you say, all of this work we've done, the sleepless nights, the plannings, the conversations, they're actually paying off.
Thank you. So first of all, I need to put a caveat here. Change is not an easy process.
Absolutely.
It is not easy to make impact. It's easier to influence And that's one of the things the summit does, influences people to begin to think differently about gender and inclusion. But making real impact is hard, but that's what we're committed to doing. So one of the things, the way we've evolved the summit over the last 3 years is, first of all, to see this as a platform that needs to be sustained in perpetuity. So first of all, understanding that advocacy, which is what we do with the platform, for change, for policy change, for impact, must be sustained. So that's the first commitment. And I think that is the first place I would say we have succeeded, at least, in pulling this off for the past 4 years. Yeah. You would see that some of the conversations we had in 2022, we're still having them, because it takes that long sometimes to make that dent that would lead to a change. But we've also seen real progress. In what ways? So first of all, when we started in the very first summit in 2022, I remember that there was a conversation about workplace inclusion for an entire sector in Nigeria. And thankfully, there was a minister and a development partner that committed right there to working together to make a change in that sector. And the next year, they came to the summit to tell us that they had been able to increase participation of women in decision-making spaces in that sector. And they now even had a section president, and that was a woman. The National Women Economic Empowerment Policy has brought that conversation around the domestication and how that economic empowerment policy can improve the outcome for women. And they have consistently come to the summit since 2022. And conversations from the summit has shaped insights that have led to where we are with now. Coming back yesterday, you see that we have worked together with partners and donors to successfully develop roadmaps that are now being launched in different states. But we still haven't stopped. That conversation has still come back to the summit, because we're now talking about how to sustain whatever impact is being made at the states. So we take critical insights from the summit. We also see 2 days ago when we're talking about developing community-led solutions for religious for addressing GBV, working with religious and traditional rulers. That conversation has also been ongoing at the summit. And we're now seeing real implementation going on in some states. You saw some traditional rulers come from those states to also reinforce the work that is being done. So over the last few years, policy insights have come. Just yesterday, we had a conversation around from aid to investment, leveraging economic diplomacy to advance inclusive development. And then, you know, one of the high-level panel members committed to working together with the Policy Innovation Center to see how we can come up with a framework to guide conversations around inclusive development, to bring those conversations into trade agreements. So there's a lot that has happened. But beyond that is a lot of people network, make connections, develop new projects. A lot of new projects have been signed off at the Gender Summit. A lot of ideas. Then talk about what we're doing with the research community. People come there, showcase their work, get support, get funding support. And finally, yesterday, we started for the first time an innovation hackathon at the summit. So that means that people who can sit in their homes hoping that their ideas will be heard can pitch to see their innovations showcased at the summit and also get funding to take those ideas forward.
And it was beautiful to see. I mean, I was there and I saw how the conversations were well curated. I mean, you talked about inclusion in the transport sector.
Yes.
You talked about inclusion. If you talk about the fashion industries, where
yes.
religious, traditional institutions, even the innovative part of it. But Jeffrey, my colleague in Lagos, would also like to come in on this. Over to you, Jeffrey.
What is of interest to me especially is, I think, what they categorize as SDG 5, gender equality, 10, reducing inequalities and others. And I looked at the summit tracks where you were highlighting strategies and diverse voices to promote women's leadership across sector. That is quite important because I was listening to former Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, I think in Kent in the UK, when he was making a presentation, where he alluded to the fact that while he was in pressure group and civil society, there is this much they could do. But being in government, he was able to move significant needle, especially as Attorney General of Lagos State. And one of the challenges we've had is systemic pushback to put women on the table. Senate has 4 women, 1 is suspended. There's an abysmal number represented as well in the House of Representatives. And then there's even worst numbers across the states, depending on the states you're looking at. All of this you're doing can move even 10 times, can 10x with women on the table in political leadership. How do you want to break that ice?
Thank you so much. Conversations around women in leadership, first of all, we all know that it's established that there's a business case for ensuring that we are increasing participation of women in decision-making spaces. That's the only way we can sustain development, advance the SDGs, and also ensure that we are improving GDP growth. I mean, the business case is clear. Over the past 3-4 years, we have brought conversations about women in leadership right at the center of the Gender and Inclusion Summit. Just this past 2 days, we had conversations. We had the Women in Leadership Coalition. They had a session about how to increase representation of women. We're not just looking at, we're very clear that representation is important at the highest level. But we also want to go down and make sure that even in the workplace, in the boardrooms, in cabinets, we have women adequately represented. And that's one thing that, I know that the Women in Leadership Coalition are advocating for. But we also yesterday had conversations, looking at what the potential, for example, for the reserve seat bill, if passed, could do for women in leadership. We also had a very interesting conversation at the summit, and I'm very passionate about this because over the next 5 years, we at the Policy Innovation Center would have that opportunity to take this not just as a conversation, but as a project. So we're working on a project we've titled Women in Economic Leadership in Academic Institutions. In the past 1 year, with the support of one of our donors, we've been looking at 6 universities and trying to understand to what extent that we have representation of women in leadership positions within the economics department. And over the last 1 year, it's interesting to know that we went to some universities, including the one I graduated from, and you have just, out of maybe 20 lecturers and professors, you have just 1 woman. And we had a dialogue where, female students told us that in my school, we don't have any economics lecturer or professor. Why do you want me to graduate and become an economist and become the next Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala? So for the next 5 years, the painstaking process of deepening our work in those universities, looking at what the problems are, and working very closely with the university to create policy and an enabling environment to increase women leadership. But beyond that project, one of the things we're doing, like I mentioned to Kayode, is sustaining advocacy. We will not get tired of speaking about this. We will not get tired of supporting. And also, we will not get tired of providing opportunities to increase economic empowerment of women. There is no woman in leadership without a woman who is economically empowered. Those two actually have to go together. And this is a commitment that we have. And that's one of the reasons why the Gender and Inclusion Summit exists.
I can see the bottom up. Perhaps I was talking about top bottom, but it's all part of the conversation. Let's talk about a bit of, well, I call it a lower hanging fruit. I know you also highlighted it in part of your tracker, and that has to do with what you're doing with women, bridging that gap in technology. In fact, a lot of young people are now into trading, whether they are trading futures or all of that. What are you doing in that direction? Because that looks like the easy access. These are spaces where young people have not been rigged out. Creativity, creative sector, and technology. So walk us through what you're doing in that space of technology.
Thank you. So just to mention that the conversations around the women economic empowerment policy is not only about, trade and market women and all that. One big piece of it that has been part of the engagement over the past 1 year is emerging sectors. So the creative sector is one of that, and looking at what the barriers to growth or achieving their full potential in the creative sector looks like. And then also within this space, we've been looking at a lot of conversations around digital inclusion for women. In fact, last year, one of the sub-themes was how do we use digital tools to improve livelihoods for women in rural and hard-to-reach areas, and then also for young people. So digital inclusion is at the core of what we do. We know what the barriers are to advancing digital inclusion, but we are committed to seeing how we can continue to not just reinforce the conversation, look at where the evidence points to. Many people were surprised yesterday that we had a session on fashion at the Gender Summit. Why did we do that? Because the creative sector is one critical area leveraging technology that can see increase in opportunities for women, young people, and marginalized groups, and men, even in the next decade. So we're really passionate about that. We're not just continuing the conversations, we're also supporting the evidence that shows how we can grow this sector.
Well, Dr. Dirisu, there's a lot to uncover about this, but it's great that you have promised to sustain this. So
yes.
Year in, year out, we'll always approach this based on what we have learned. And this women economic empowerment policy, we must mention that there are states, a lot of states that have not implemented it just yet. And that means that they're sort of disenfranchising women in that sense. So this is a call out to states. If you are in a state currently, I don't want to reel out the names, but you should ask if you're in a state and that women economic empowerment policy has not been domesticated or being implemented, then you need to raise some dust, because it means that we're not running on two engines as we ought to. We're just sort of running on one engine. But as we wind down, Dr. Dirisu, I'd like you to speak to those who maybe missed out on it. They still have an opportunity to catch a playback of the Gender and Inclusion Summit today. Maybe speak to that and let us know what the next few months will look like, because this is just one part of the job, really. There's a lot more work to be done before
Absolutely.
the next one. So we'll just wind down with that.
Thank you. So many ways you can still engage if you miss the summit. First of all, I know we have a playback of some aspects of the summit on live TV, on channels, and on other TV stations. In addition to that, we have all the sessions on YouTube. So a real opportunity to watch, engage, learn, engage on our social media also. And we have a post-summit event in November in Rwanda. So if by any chance any of us happens to be in Rwanda, the date to be announced in a couple of weeks, please also join us in Rwanda to continue the conversations. And finally, as we wind down from the summit, the team is now going to work on what we call the Purple Book. So every conversation that happened in the past 2 days will be synthesized, the recommendations synthesized, critical insights synthesized into the Purple Book, which will make publicly available March every year. So you can take those conversations again, use the insights to inform your work. And finally, over the next few months, we're going to take the insights from the summit and work with all the stakeholders that made promises, made commitments, shared recommendations to see how we can co-create solutions into the future. Because when we come back in 2026, we don't want to report the conversations, we want to report the impacts.
Fantastic. So there's a lot to do with this conversation, and the Purple Book is available publicly eventually.
Yes,
or will
it's
be
publicly available.
So they can get it from your website.
Yes, 2022, 23, and 24 are available on our website. So
that's some great body of work for policy development and implementation.
Yes.
We have to thank you so much, Dr. Osasi Dirisu, for the great work you're doing with the Policy Innovation Center and the Gender and Inclusion Summit. So here's to ensuring that we are more inclusive as a people, as a society. After all, it is in our, what's that word now? Self-enlightened interest.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Dirisu.
Thank you so much.